Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you for tuning in to today's informational presentation, Food Safety in a Digital Era, Online Expectations. My name's Stone, and I will be offering technical support to today's speakers. Today, we're welcoming back Jen Crandall of Safe Food en Route, and I'll introduce her a little later in the broadcast. Just a few housekeeping notes. All attendees are on mute to ensure audio clarity. However, we do want to hear your questions. So to ask a question, just type it into the questions tab within the control panel and click send. And we'll be sure to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. A question we receive often is, will the main presentation be recorded? And the answer is yes. And the answer is yes. The recordings will be available on our website, YouTube, and Spotify in case you're interested in rewatching later or sharing the presentation with colleagues. Here's a quick look at the questions tab. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. So all you have to do is submit a question throughout the presentation, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker, Paul Demarin, the Senior Vice President of Food Safety here at PJR FSI. Paul joined us about a year ago and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Paul is a board member of the Ontario Food Protection Association, as well as an advisory council member on the George Washington University School of Business for the Digital Marketing Certificate Program. Prior to PJR FSI, Paul worked for 16 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul also worked for many years in the management systems certification industry as well. And before that, Paul was a professional chef and consultant for 20 years. So without further ado, Paul, take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Stone. I appreciate it. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. I really appreciate you joining. I'm very excited to be welcoming back Jen Crandall, who's a good colleague of ours and has supported us through many of our webinars. I'm looking forward to chatting with you a little bit later as well, Jen. We're going to do a little bit of a different type of presentation today where it'll be more interactive than really just a formal presentation. So just before I do that, I'm going to just talk for a few minutes about who we are as a company, and then we'll move right into the presentation. So we were founded back in 1994 as Perry Johnson Registrars, and that was founded by Perry Johnson himself. We achieved ANAB accreditation, our first accreditation in 1995, and then started expanding globally overseas in Japan, Brazil, Spain, Italy, Latin America, Thailand, and others. We also attained our UCAS accreditation in 1999. And in 2012, Perry Johnson Registrar Food Safety was born, and that was really as a demand in the industry for third-party certification and standards auditing. We're based in Troy, Michigan, part of a global company. We have offices in about 20 countries around the world, auditors in over 60, and we offer services ranging everything from cannabis and hemp to the GFSI standards, as well as second-party standards as well. So over the last 9 years, we've worked with companies across every sector within the food and supply chain sectors. We're extremely committed to adding value throughout our auditing program and process. We work with retailers, processors, farms, importers and exporters, distribution companies. And typically when we are conducting audits or services for our companies, the main goal is to manage food safety, supply chain risk, quality, and brand protection requirements. Our services are broken out into really 4 key areas. We have auditing and certification to third-party international standards like GFSI, as well as our family of ISO standards that's managed through the PJR entity. We offer second-party unaccredited services such as GMP audits, HACCP, good distribution or packaging. We do a lot of customer-specific work as well. McDonald's would be a good example of that. If you have any companies that have their own audit program and they're looking for a third party like PJR FSI to conduct those assessments, we have the ability to do that, as well as we offer full training for all of our standards that we audit to. Now, this is just a look at some of the standards that we currently support. We have over 30 programs just on the food side. And as you know, most companies today are required to do business to have audits to one or more of these standards. Some of these are client specific, some are government regulated, some are retailer mandated. Whichever one that you need, we have resources to be able to support that. Finally, I guess just to refer to the fact that we are recognized by the government and various governments to conduct different types of assessments or inspections like FSMA or the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, Voluntary Qualified Importer Program, etc. And then this is the list of accreditations and scheme owners that we work with and are recognized around the world for. I believe that accreditation offers customers assurance that the family of companies that we own and operate under the rules of accreditation and scheme owners, and that helps to regulate us as a certification body. And with that, I am just going to say thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to that quick overview. At this point, we're going to move on to the more exciting part of our presentation today. And this is where I would like to introduce a close colleague of mine and our second speaker. It's our pleasure to introduce Jen Crandall. She's the CEO and founder of Safe Food En Route. Jen has a food science degree from Purdue University and has 8 years of manufacturing experience, with 12 years of those being at the Kroger corporate offices. In 2018, she founded Safe Food En Route, and I know that her and her team have never looked back and have never been busier. Their team are in the food safety consulting space with a focus on the FSMA rules or the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSVP, and supplier compliance. Their mission is to make corporate food safety programs accessible to the small and medium-sized companies using systems that are intentionally designed with love for people in food. And today's presentation, I've asked Jen to talk a little bit more about food safety in a digital era and discussing some of today's online expectations that we're all facing. So with that, Jen, I'm going to ask you to please go ahead and speak for a few moments. And I have a few questions that I'll kind of throw in throughout as well. And thank you again for being here.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. I love doing the webinars with you guys. So yeah, I think you caught the heart of it with what we're trying to do with thoughtful designs and try to create food safety systems that are corporate level for the small and medium-sized companies. And it's really important that we just kind of stop and talk a little bit about where does food safety start. And there's a lot of movement that's been going on in the industry about big data and blockchain and how digitalizing your data. And the whole theme of this conversation is around digitalizing your data, but it really starts with the core elements: the food, the hazards around the food, the producers of the food, the people that are making it, the facilities, the programs, the culture in that program, and then the data that supports it. And I think it's just really important that we spend some time talking about that and making sure that we understand what is the root of what we're discussing, because it's really easy to get wrapped up in big data. I almost want to, it's just like a really, can I say it's a sexy word? I mean, it's like big data is really exciting for the industry, and to think that it might be something that will quote unquote solve all of our food safety problems. But if you follow Safe Food En Route at all today, I posted 2 recalls that are going on currently with salmonella, one in some hummus and one in some pet food. And so it's like where's the big data solving those problems? So I just want to make sure that we spend some time talking about that, and that it's the entire pie that consists, where food safety is, pun intended. Data created from food safety programs does not have really the cause and effect with the food safety. And data's agnostic. I was on a conference a little while ago with Andrew Kennedy, who's from the New Era Technology team leader from the FDA, and he said it really well at Purdue University's Big Data Safe Food Conference. He said it's what you do with the data. It is giving the decision makers the tools to manage that data. So, I want to start us off on the conversation, kind of kick off the conversation, reminding us that the data is just data. That's all it is. And unless you do something with the data, then it really means nothing, right? So I know that might be a little bit passionate right out of the gate, so I'll back off a little, Paul, if you want to go on to some questions and answers that you might have, and we can start talking a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, sure. No, that sounds good, Jen. I actually did see some of those posts that you had earlier as well. So you mentioned at the big data conference there as well the importance of some of those data sets and data points. Can you give me a few examples of what you might be referring to in terms of data that you feel is maybe the most important?
Well, I mean, like right now, the hot topic is traceability and the data that's surrounding traceability. So the amount of product that's produced. And a lot of people think when traceability, when we talk about traceability, the first thing that usually comes up in people's minds is related to recalls and related to, how to identify product quickly between one entity to another. So whether it's going one step back or one step forward, but that's kind of the hot topic right now. And honestly, when you look at traceability data, that has nothing to do with food safety either. And that probably freaked out a bunch of people, and maybe some of the people that'll catch the recording will say that, kind of be like, oh, what are you talking about? But it really doesn't. Traceability is volume of product produced, or, total count, whatever you might be doing to measure that. And it's more about understanding what went into that product, the code dates related to that product, and how you can track it through the system to the consumer. None of that, nothing I said there has anything to do with managing food safety. So, but
Right.
it's still a core part of it, right? We have to know how much we made, because if a food safety situation comes up, we need to know how to track it through. So I would say, honestly, that's probably one of the biggest things. And then you start looking at what data do we collect? What helps us support that story? And that can be all related to it. And then, tell us more attributes about the product. What specifications are we trying to meet of that product? Micro specifications, chemical specifications, and then there you go into the pre-planning and the planning of the allergens and making sure that you don't have any allergens in the product that might be added to a different product later. So you're doing a lot of allergen planning, or gluten or whatever it might be. So there's a lot there that could be associated with it.
Right.
I know I have a list on one of our slides that, on the data not written. So data, we'll go back to that one in a minute. Let's talk first about the FDA food safety blueprint, and just kind of discuss some of that. So, these are 4 pillars that are on the FDA Smarter Food Safety document. This comes right off of the FDA website. That we have tech-enabled traceability programs, smarter tools and approaches for prevention. So I mentioned traceability, there it is, the first bullet point. And then you have smarter tools and approaches for prevention. So kind of looking at that, artificial intelligence possibly, and ways to be able to trend and predict that there might be an outbreak coming. So maybe we see some activity that's happening in one sector of the food industry that might ripple and affect another sector. Is there a way, is something that was predictive with related to the salmonella outbreak that we're currently having? Those are two different products, possibly completely unrelated. I would just my gut says they are completely unrelated. But let's take an instant that we are familiar with, that we hear about a lot, like leafy greens and E. coli outbreaks. Is there a way that we could have predicted what was going on? Were there things about the environmental changes? Was there something that could have told us that, hey, there's a potential of a problem that is surfacing at this point? So it's just using smarter tools. And then the FDA talks about new business models and retail modernization. There are so many companies that are still using paper. And I think, what was it, our last webinar that we talked about it? We asked a question about how many people were still on paper. And I think it was like 80% of the respondents in manufacturing were still on paper, still doing all of their paperwork on paper. We need to shift as an organization, or as an industry. We got to shift away from using paper. One, not very sustainable, right? We're killing our trees. But two, it's not helpful to thumb through papers to try to trend data. You can't look at the past and predict the future easily if you cannot trend it easily. So the FDA is pushing for that new business model. And then food safety culture. This is a huge new topic that I'm very excited about. I've met several people that are focusing a lot on food safety culture, but this is about your people. This is about your systems and your processes, and how you can enable people to be able to, just support them more as they try to do what is right. And some of the fascinating people that I'm following now online, and I'm going to do a shout out if you don't care, Paul, but Jill Stuber, the food safety coach, she's putting out some phenomenal information, and she's focused on like supporting the the food safety quality professionals in a way that I've never seen before. And it's coming in it from a human resources perspective, because I can remember when I was 20 years ago starting in the industry and had no idea what I was doing. I was still learning. I was learning how to even be I almost joke, like being a human being, like I was learning how to be an adult. And I was being asked to lead people in their food safety systems. I knew the books, I knew what I was supposed to do, but how to lead people, how to manage a day program and have a schedule, and some of the information that she's putting out there, it's really good. And there's several other people that are playing on that, but the FDA is emphasizing that this is important. We need to support our food safety quality professionals. We need to support the structures and systems that are in place to help make sure that we are producing safe food. All right, sorry, I am not giving you much time to ask questions, so I'll flip it to you.
No, I mean, that's okay. I've mentioned this so many times before. The world just is changing very rapidly, and I think that we're going to continue to see more changes in the food industry and system, for that matter, for probably the next 10 to 20 years. There's foods out there that are continually being reformulated. There's new foods. There's new production methods. And I think that's one of the reasons that the FDA was taking the approach, or the new approach to food safety, and trying to leverage new technologies that are out there, ultimately to, I guess, help curb the foodborne illness in the industry by using data. So it's very interesting to hear you speak about this, Jen, because I hear it a lot as well. And there's a great deal of talk about, the new era blueprint from Frank Yanis. But why don't we continue to move on here? And I do have a few more questions that I'll ask just in the coming slides here.
Yeah. So obviously this slide says it all, right? Data not written means the action did not happen. That's the regulatory industry. Anyone that's in regulatory and compliance and quality assurance, We know if we didn't write it down, then it didn't happen. That's not necessarily the truth, but it's the truth when it comes to proving it to people who are, holding you accountable for it. So how do they know it happened if you don't have it written? If the preventive action and managing the hazard was not documented in an FDA perspective, point of view, inspector, or like a state authority or USDA, then it did not happen. And there's no way to prove that things happened without writing them down. And I think, like kind of coming back to your question before of what important things can we think about that would be the things we need, the data we need to collect, right? So what do we need to write down? Where do we write things down in manufacturing and in this space? We collect data and share it forward all the time with things that are critical to the end user, and a lot of times to the customer, things that we know are good. There needs to be, I think there needs to be development effort around making that easier for the collection of that data. And here's just a handful of things that might make sense. Cleaning and sanitizing records. So like looking at it from a manufacturing or a grower or farm point of view, cleaning, sanitation, processing records, supply chain management, training, employee training, storage temperatures, environmental monitoring, anything to do with verifications of your preventive controls or any actions that were taken, allergens, regulatory audits, second party audits, third party audits, retailers, wholesalers, the list can be endless, really, on what we are asking to develop programs around. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's very good information. I oftentimes work with my clients to help them build and develop out supply chain programs, and all of these areas, as well as many others, are some of the things that we highlight when we're trying to, mitigate the risk that their supply chain faces each day. So when you're looking at data collection though, Jen, do you think there's hesitancy on collecting certain types of data in the food industry, or is there such a thing as sharing too much information?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be hesitancy on who is receiving and has access to my data. I think, from what I've been witnessing, people are nervous, companies are nervous of sharing too much. And what is too much? What are they afraid of sharing? I think they're afraid of sharing data that's going to be used against them in some way from a legal point of view or from a customer perspective. So you get a little nervous about sharing, oversharing, I guess, would be sharing processing information that doesn't need to be shared, or maybe you have proprietary systems that you don't want people to get access to. So then there's that, non-disclosure agreements between parties. And when you have a system like a platform like blockchain, which has been the hot topic in the past few years,
Right.
Permission based is really important. Who has permission to see what I am giving you or what I am, need to share to my customer, and understanding that. And, you have the attorneys read through it all, and you hope that everybody is dotting their I's and crossing their T's and making sure that nothing is, nothing legally is getting done that we're not aware of. But there is a lot of concern, and I see it. I'm sure you see it in your clients too. Like, I don't want to share all that because then somebody will, maybe they'll find fault in it. So I don't know if you see the same thing. I'll throw the question back at you.
Yeah, I mean, I do, absolutely. I mean, especially when, we're very open when it comes to sharing documentation like our audit checklist or protocol, with clients. And really, it's meant to be more of a kicking off, type of situation, because we want them to see potentially what is out there in terms of audit protocol checklists, what other companies are asking for, and to get people thinking about maybe this is relevant for my business and maybe it isn't. But when we're looking at programs for supply chain, we also take a look at things outside of what you had discussed, things like food fraud or financial stability of the company, because that's all equally as important as well when you're looking at it from a risk perspective.
Right.
So,
right.
I've heard Jen, you speak about, the supply chain communication traps that retailers are facing with traceability record keeping. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, this is something I borrowed from one of my previous bosses when I was at Kroger. He and I used to describe the supply chain this way. So just looking at this graph, grower farmer is at the tail end and the retailer is at the top of the chain. And when you look at each one of these points, and this is a very abbreviated version, but these are all touch points of people, right? So, the grower farmer might go through a collector. They might have some type of process in there. So there could be 2 or 3 more points in this graph at that bottom. And then you have a warehouse, and then you send it through an exporter who might have a different warehouse or has a loading area, and then it comes over through an importer. The importer might have to go through additional treatment. So sometimes there might be an irradiation treatment facility or some other type of for pest bombing or whatever. So there might be a different process there. So there's all these different touch points of things that happen. And then eventually it gets to the distributor, to the brand owner, whoever is warehousing it that's selling it to the retailer. And the assumption is that the grower and the retailer have this direct relationship, but they really don't. Usually, at least my experience, usually the retailer has the relationship with the very next one in their chain, which would be that distributor or brand owner. And then so when I was in my seat, and I still see it now, there's this it's almost like a circular pattern that happens where you ask for a document, and you might ask for 12 documents or 20 documents. So kind of put yourself in the food safety professional's point of view who's doing maybe a supply chain review. So at the retailer level or at that customer level, they're asking for documents, and then they're asking the distributor, and then the distributor is going back in their chain and asking for the documents, and then that person's going back. So it's like, in this instance, you have 5 phases. My experience is that each one of those people is equivalent to a week of communication. So this chart here represents easily 20 weeks worth of communication, because you have 1 week back all the way to the grower. So you've got 4 bullet points, let's say, and the grower sends it back through the channels. So you've got 8 going back to the retailer, and then it's probably going to take a week for the retailer to review the documents minimum, maybe more. And then they find out that's not the right document, or I'm missing a piece. And so then go back to the distributor, and you go back down the chain again. And so, it goes back and forth, and it goes round and round like this. This happens every single day, and it happens from the retailer perspective. And I think this is really good for a lot of your audience, so that they understand why it sometimes seems like I don't get responses, or why it seems like it takes forever to do things with the retailers, or even those large wholesalers and food service companies. But this is thousands of suppliers and hundreds of documents per supplier. And now on top of it, with the traceability stuff that's going on, you've got these key data elements on top of it that are more product level. So everything I just described, we were asking a lot for at the supplier level. Now the FDA is putting in that traceability rule, key data elements that we need to follow at the product level. So it's going to be a very interesting transition as we go through. And it's like, I don't know, the way that it's trending, it's going to be a very difficult thing to overcome without the assistance of new developed softwares systems. So really,
Right.
the bottom line is retailers do not have time for that, and neither do the grower and farmers. Like, all of us want to get work done, right?
Yeah, I know the FSMA is implementing a new rule, or I think it's section 204 or 205, but it's enhancing the tracking and tracing of food and record keeping. So I'm thinking that, really kind of a couple of questions here is, do you think that companies implementing a digitized system is going to help with the communication trap? And the second part of that would be, is there any part of this chain here that you feel needs more support with ensuring accurate communication than another?
Oh, those are good questions. I mean, so let's answer the second one first.
Okay.
Because I feel like there's a lot of support that needs to happen at the small and medium-sized business. That's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, because they just don't have the knowledge or understanding of how the full corporate programs work, right? So that's one. But at each point of these pivots, there is a breakdown that could happen depending on the value add that that company offers to the supply chain. And so I think it's most important to kind of identify the gaps from the grower farmer level. Like, the retailer wants the grower farmer information. The grower farmer needs to provide it to the retailer, but all these other entities are in between, because they're protecting their relationships and trying to maintain confidentiality. They might have exclusivity, or they might not have exclusivity. So then the retailer's getting that same grower farmer coming through multiple venues, and those venues don't realize each other are competing for that space. Or maybe they do and they don't care. To me, that's where, like, there's just a lot of confusion around that. And kind of going back to the block, I pull up the blockchain a lot as discussion point, because it's interesting that platform it has what has been developed around it to help with the traceability rule and what's coming down the line with the FDA. You have a one-to-one relationship oftentimes with that software platform. So the one-to-one versus the real world is it's many to many. So I just described, if the grower farmer is supplying multiple companies, then you're widening this arrow out of how they distribute it, and then it's coming back into the retailer from multiple people. So it's like a one to many to one, but it's really one to many, because that retailer is not their only customer.
Right.
So there's just a lot of complexity there that can create a little bit of confusion in the supply chain. So I think that's one area that definitely needs to be solved. And then I apologize, I went off and missed. I don't think I've answered the first question. So if you bring that
I
back.
was just, communication being a major issue, and really it always has been. People are always looking to communicate better with their colleagues or their spouse or coworkers. But I'm just wondering if you think that digitizing, the various programs that are out there to help manage traceability, is that going to be a positive thing? Is that going to take the industry a long time to actually implement, or how do you see that in general?
Yeah, I think I don't honestly. I haven't put a lot of thought into it, but I think that it would. Um, that's not, you're stumping me, Paul.
No, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, it's a great question. There's so many things with communication and how we communicate. Having a centralized platform that all of the industry has access to, as scary as that sounds, and that's what the blockchain is trying to solve. That's what a
Right,
lot of these companies that are creating a blockchain, I shouldn't say the blockchain, it's not one. There's
right,
many IT people developing many different platforms that are similar to the blockchain technology. But yeah, like, I think that would help. And we're in a shifting pattern right now as the industry of going from paper trails and email trails. Email is so difficult. Like I just described, that is a 12-week email cycle. It can easily become that. and trying to reduce that, yeah, that absolutely would help. Like, think about how much faster you could sell something if you had all the documents easily accessible within a day to the person asking. They'd probably be more willing to buy it.
Right.
So, there's a lot of advantage to going digital, digitalizing your data and going with some of these platforms because of that right there. That's
Yeah.
marketability. That puts you ahead of the pack.
Yeah.
So that
Great
makes you
answer.
easier to work with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. That's a great answer. And like every new regulation that's out there, the proposed rule represents both benefits and hurdles. So
Mhm.
why do you, or what do you believe are the biggest benefits of the new rules, and what do you think it's going to most effectively address?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I see happening, and like I think there's some, kind of doing a SWOT analysis to the new rules, and this one's really more addressing the traceability rule, but FSMA in general has given us a lot of opportunities and challenges as well. So, from the strength side of it, the the retailers were already pushing for GFSI, and a lot of the audience is familiar, I'm sure, with GFSI requirements and how that has helped. The intent is that it will help the industry improve their food safety programs and document it and have things thoroughly monitored and have an accountability system built into it. So the retailers pushed for that, though. That originated, gosh, we've probably been talking about it since early 2000s,
Right.
and getting that implemented and rolled out. And Walmart was one of the first to the gate to say it's required. And then Kroger jumped on, and a lot of the other retailers have been jumping on ever since in the bulk food industry. So the big companies can push. This is where they can push the requirements and make sure that we're meeting the regulatory requirements. They have a lot of things in their contracts that already tell you you must obey all the rules that are applicable to your product.
Right.
That's built into the backbone of their legal contracts. But just a supporting push. This would be a great position for them. We have the weakness of the complexity of the communication to the retailer, and transactional data is becoming more detailed. We're asking for things to be more detailed, so that's a weakness because we're not there yet. And that's so, like, transactional data would be just easy information passing back and forth, and now we're trying to add to it all of the complexity of, like, how much volume did you create, did you produce of this, and it's got to track through for, if you read and study that new traceability rule, there's a lot of stuff in there about what types. So there's a list, there's a food traceability list. Those are the foods that are required to do the work. And so that's all been proposed, and I think the proposal ended in, for comments. They ended the comment period at the end of February. So now the industry's waiting on the reaction of the FDA. But that's going to make it more complex. So we have a weakness there that we're going to have to work through. And threats. So kind of going to the next, from the threat side of it, consumer safety. Obviously, this is of utmost importance. That's the whole point of the rules. Reducing FDA citations, supply chain disruption, loss of business. Those are things, those are real legitimate things. If you have a recall, you have an import warning, you have, you're not following the rules, you have a citation, those can put your business at jeopardy. So it's obviously something you want to avoid, but also branding, um, it's not good for the brand if you have a recall. And it's not good for the brand if somebody dies. That's not good. Nobody could argue that that's a good thing.
No, of course.
So, those are, but that's a threat to the system, obviously. But then, so that opens up all these opportunities. What can we do? And you kind of go back to the centralizing the data in one place and removing that complexity of the communication so that it's easier flow of data. So, I mean, the analysis has already been done. The FDA is already, full on with it. Frank Giannis has all those years at Walmart to be able to
Right.
support his decisions of why he's pushing this. But guess who else is on the bandwagon? European Union just put into some laws into effect to work around some of this stuff, and Canada is too.
Yeah.
There's lots of countries are supporting what is going on in the food industry and trying to help us all shift to a better smarter food safety era, right? So using the FDA's pun or their mantra.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I know that, you know, you're right. It has been around for some time now. And a lot of people think that this was Frank Giannis, you know, solely doing this. And he certainly had a great deal of input to develop this. But I know from speaking with people that there were, I think, over 100 different people that had participated in brainstorming the sessions of the, you know, the 4 key elements that
Mm-hmm.
maybe we just talk for a quick second about. I know it wasn't really kind of part of this, but I think that the, you know, the plan is the main element was, I think the core element was technology-enabled traceability programs, which we've talked about. There's other tools and approaches that are looking at prevention of outbreak, which is good. The new business model for food retail modernization, and then food safety culture. Now, if you took a look at those 4 elements, Jen, would you suggest that, you know, food culture is probably one of the most important elements, as it really kind of drives the success of the other 3? That's just kind of how I'm looking at it. I'm not sure what your
Oh,
thought is.
no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, so if you, I bet we could go back. I don't know if Stone, if you're on that, but go back to the 4th slide that has the FDA Smarter Food Safety on it. One more. Yep, that one. You know, food safety, you could almost build this as a pyramid, right? The way you just described it, Paul, the pyramid would definitely be the bottom, the base of it would be that food safety culture. Because how can you do any of this
Right.
without a top-down approach of making sure that you have it even written into your mission of what your company is producing, safe food? You know, if that's not the, you know, if we look back at historically at outbreaks that have happened, and I'm not, things happen, right? So, you know, mistakes happen, people make mistakes, and you can't prevent everything. And I honestly don't believe that that is, all of us would say that's the goal, is 0 illnesses, 0 outbreaks. That makes sense to say, but realistically, you can't prevent everything. There are new emerging things happen all the time. You know, when the spinach started to have an outbreak with E. coli, that was one of the first times we had ever seen that inside the leaf. It was inside the plant. You know,
Right.
who predicted that? We couldn't cook it out. And it's a food we eat fresh, so already pretty scary. But, you know, go back a little bit further, we had E. coli in flour in the Nestle Toll House, and not to name brand, but this is, you know, public data, right? So it was probably 2008, 2009, when they had E. coli 0157H7 in their flour. And, you know, where was the breakdown in that? Where did that happen? That's new emerging data. We reacted as fast as we could. But if you look at a lot of the ones that were probably preventable. So, you know, I'm sure someone like Bill Marler, the attorney that posts on the
Right.
Food Safety News, Bill probably has trended this and knows, and people around his core team probably have, and they know when it was absolutely preventable and when it was something new that we had never seen before. I'm sure somebody has studied that. When it is preventable, what's the core of preventing it? It's the culture that is. It's the pre-planning, the thoughtful design around it, the, you know, strategic management of the processes, the support to the team, the making sure they have the resources that they need. The technology is part of those resources. So yeah, I think, you know, long story short, food safety culture absolutely is the most important out of those 3. And then it supports the other 3 more. Absolutely.
Right. I think that there's been, you know, just over the last couple of years that I've been looking at some of the data, you do tend to, and since food safety culture has become so prominent, that you see a lot of really dramatic improvements in the reduction of foodborne disease that we're seeing. And I think it's because of the buy-in of senior management. It's companies' beliefs, their attitudes, their mantra, if you will. But really, it's the action, I think, of all people believing in food safety culture. And from what I'm seeing in today's world, it's becoming a prerequisite to effective food safety management. So
Yeah. Well, and
yeah,
it was already written into the GFSI benchmarks standards already required that you have like leadership commitment and
right.
management commitment. That was their way of trying to solve this.
Hmm.
So again, going back to your comment before, it's not new. This is not new information that we're working with. We've known that this is needed, but it's helpful, and I feel like it's a good move that
Right.
we have, that built into the regulation as well. I'm curious because I think the European Union just put it into a law in effect around food safety culture, and
Hmm.
I'm really curious how they're planning to measure it, because that seems like such a something that'd be difficult to measure in a meaningful way. So
Yeah, I know some of the schemes out there have different programs like BRCGS, and where they
yeah.
actually manage the food safety culture by having all of the employees participate in surveys and things like that. But
Hmm.
I mean, we have colleagues of ours over in the UK, so I could certainly ask them if they have any further detail on that.
Yeah, I'd be curious, and I think that'll be like, even as the FDA starts looking at it, what are they looking for? How do they, from a regulatory point of view, it's not necessarily like I know what's in the audits and the audit schemes, but from a regulatory point of view, how do you quote unquote grade someone on culture?
Right.
Like that's a pretty daunting task. Um, I put this quote in here. I wanted to make sure that we covered it because to me, I look at this quote every single day. It's on my desk. It's been on my desk since I was at Kroger, probably since 2000. It's probably been, I might have had this in 2004 or 5 when I was still at the previous location. Like just read it out loud. It's everyone's, quality is everyone's responsibility. Well, let's replace quality with food safety or with anything else. I mean, I write it and honestly write, and a good life is never an accident, right? So you can put almost anything into quality, but quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. And William A. Foster was a Marine that passed away in the Battle of Okinawa in May of 1945. He jumped on a grenade to save his other Marines, and he said this, and it just to me was really interesting to read his story and understand why he would say something like that. To me, that was a man who lived intentionally. He knew what he wanted to do. He was strategic, had very strategic things. That's one of the core things. SFER stands for Safe Food and Route for those that are reading the slide and going, what? But for us, it's thoughtful designs. Everything is intentional. Everything that we create is intentional. And that's what really needs to be done. Like go back to the food safety culture and quality culture. Uh, you know, Everything related to it can be intentional. Of course, random things pop up. Of course, things are going to throw us off course. But it is definitely an intentional maneuvering around that, like we can schedule our days with good intention to have a good outcome. But yeah, from the food safety culture side of it, I still think this is something big. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. It's funny, I actually have a couple of quotes on my desk as well, and they're both as well around quality. And the first one is
we're
quality.
seeing your screen, Paul, just FYI.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. What is going on here? My whole screen is popping
I
up.
was
I'm
like, I
so
don't think you meant
sorry. Sorry about that, guys.
that.
I don't know why you're seeing my screen though, because Stone is controlling it. So
Oh,
interesting. But yeah, so I mean, the one that I have is quality isn't everything; it's the only thing, and there's only one way to coast downhill. So it's kind
yes,
of
yeah.
similar in many ways. But Jen, when you're looking at the FSVP quality or supplier programs, what do you think are a few things that are regularly missed by clients, and where should they intentionally focus?
Well, like from me and our clients, usually we're focused on being like an outsourced food safety team. So we're not always the eyes and ears on the ground. And I think that's the obvious thing that everybody thinks is part of it, and that's more like quality control. Quality control is recording everything and documenting everything as it happens. Quality assurance and just kind of the food safety space, you know, it's putting sustainable programs in place. So a consultant can come in and easily write, a quick, here's a HACCP plan for you, or here's a, an SQF program. Now, good luck, and walk out. But writing those sustainable programs, I think that's just it's the race against money and budget. So it's a balance, right? And it's hard to balance whether we want to spend a little bit extra and get really to the core of the problems and make sure that we're managing the programs efficiently, effectively, and in a way that our staff is not overwhelmed and not overtaxed with their time, that they have enough time budgeted to be able to accomplish it all. I, One thing I will say, and again, I don't mean to keep plugging Jill. I just took one of her classes a few weeks ago, and she talked about, and I think SQF gives you a good way to do this when I went through the training. I'm not sure if BRC does, but like doing a workload capacity on your team, that is probably a really big thing that people don't think about when they think about food safety programs and culture. But workload capacity, you don't want to burn out your people. There's a reason that we have a revolving door in the manufacturing plants. They get burnt out, they're tired, they can't progress forward, they don't always have strategy around it. And even the big companies that have a little bit more longevity, I think this is a risk as well, where you just have to constantly look at that workload capacity to see, can they handle it? One person can't do it all. So you've got to give them support. They need people, they need systems. So it's, that's the core of what we focus on all the time. I'm currently, like you said before, like we are growing at a rapid pace. So that's one of the things that I'm focused on right now is systems and people, and trying to make sure I have both, have standard operating procedures for everything. And it's a lot. It's a lot to do whenever you're expanding quickly. So picking up that one. I want to add to this, because this came up with a client, or it wasn't even a client, it was a prospective client. They were getting pursued by a large retailer, and they were a smaller company that was their own brand, and the retailer wanted to do private label work with them. And I kind of advised them to go against it. And the reason I did was because they weren't ready. And I think that's a scary thing for people to admit is I don't have the systems and designs in place to be able to support this growth yet. And I was like, you need to get strategic in how you want to grow. And I'm sitting here hearing myself and thinking I need to I need to get strategic in how, say, Food and Root grows. But those are the same things, like it's just step back, take time, think about it. How do you want to grow? Is my goal to have private label as well as my brand? Do I want to? I mean, it doesn't sound related to food safety, but it all is related to food safety. We're the food industry. Our brand is supposed to be focused on food safety as well as giving the customer a delightful experience. So, it really is. You don't want to, again, I go back, it's bad for the brand if you're killing people. It's just not good.
Right, right. Well, Jen, this has been absolutely wonderful. I always enjoy going back and forth and talking about food safety and culture, and specifically our webinar today on food safety in a digital era. So this is the contact information for Jen and her team, should you wish to reach out to Jen. Just before we go to the Q&A, if we have any, I'm just going to show you our upcoming 2 webinars that we have. These are both coming up next week, and on Tuesday, I will be meeting with Melody Gee. She's the Vice President for Governance, Intelligence, and Analytics at Corvium. And we're going to be talking about taking your environmental monitoring program to a new level. And then later in that week, I'll be meeting on Thursday the 8th with a colleague of mine that I've known for many years, Denise Webster, and she is the owner and founder of Food Brand. And we're going to be talking about lessons that have been learned over the past year, as well as current and future issues and things that we're going to be seeing or that we have been seeing in the future of food safety. So we're looking forward to that. At this point, Stone, I'm going to pass it back over to you to see if we have any questions from the audience.
So just looking at the questions tab, we actually don't have questions. Don't have questions from the audience. So
okay, no worries. Well, I mean, we did go through and have a lot of questions throughout. Should you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at any point afterwards, myself or Jen. Then I guess on behalf of Perry Johnson, Registrars Food Safety Inc., Jennifer, as always, thank you so much for your time. Stone, thank you as well. And we appreciate everybody attending today. So that will end our webinar, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Yes, hope to hear from you soon.
Great, thank you.